year 1423 and a half, an era so uneventful that historians often skipped it entirely, Queen Mildred ascended the throne of Transylvania. Her coronation ceremony was held in the Grand Hall of Tepid Occasions, a room so beige it had been declared emotionally neutral by royal decree. The crowd was modest, not because of political unrest, but because most citizens had simply forgotten the event was happening. Those who did attend brought snacks, pillows, and a general sense of resignation. The royal trumpeter played a single note before quietly excusing himself to take a nap behind the curtains. Mildred herself arrived fashionably late, wearing a ceremonial robe made of recycled curtain fabric and a crown that had previously served as a fruit bowl. She waved to the crowd with the enthusiasm of someone acknowledging a distant acquaintance at a funeral. Her first royal proclamation? Let there be a modest reduction in the pigeon population, but only if convenient. The royal advisors nodded solemnly, then immediately forgot what she said. One of them wrote it down on a napkin, which was later used to wrap a sandwich. The throne squeaked as Mildred sat, not dramatically, just enough to make everyone shift uncomfortably. A court painter attempted to capture the moment, but fell asleep halfway through and accidentally painted a bowl of lentils instead. Thus began the reign of Queen Mildred the Unmemorable. Her rule would be marked not by conquest, scandal, or innovation, but by a slow, steady seduction of the empire's soul through the power of gentle indifference. If romance were a spreadsheet, Queen Mildred would be its pivot table. Shortly after her coronation, Mildred turned her royal gaze toward the most overlooked department in the empire, the Census Bureau, located in a windowless basement beneath the Ministry of Slightly Important Things. The Bureau was staffed by individuals who had not seen sunlight or excitement since the great paperclip shortage of 1397. Mildred arrived unannounced, wearing her ceremonial slippers and a cloak made entirely of recycled meeting minutes. The census clerks, startled by the presence of royalty, immediately dropped their quills, which rolled under desks and were never seen again. Her first words to the bureau chief, Sir Humphrey of mild disinterest, were, "I believe the population records would be more seductive if sorted by middle name." Sir Humphrey blinked twice, then fainted. Thus began Mildred's slow, sensual overhaul of the empire's demographic data. She introduced thrilling innovations such as the flirtatious filing system. All records were now stored in velvet folders labeled with ambiguous compliments. The Wink Index, a new metric measuring citizen charm based on eyebrow arch and sigh frequency. The bureaucratic boudoir, a break room redesigned with fainting couches and a mural of two quills embracing. Clerks began to swoon over her monotone speeches about population density. One wrote her a love poem entirely in census codes. Another proposed marriage via a pie chart. Mildred, ever the seductress of spreadsheets, responded with a 14-page memo titled, "Reasons I Might Consider Your Proposal, Pending Review." It was mostly footnotes. By the end of the fiscal quarter, the Census Bureau had become the hottest department in Transylvania. Citizens lined up to be counted, hoping for a glimpse of Mildred's signature sigh. The empire's birth rate increased slightly, though experts attributed this to the new romantic tax incentive for couples who fill out forms together. And so, Queen Mildred seduced the empire not with passion, but with paperwork. Her reign continued to lull the land into a gentle stupor, one department at a time. Welcome, weary traveler of the internet, to the most thrillingly boring tale ever told. If you're here for action, drama, or anything that requires a pulse, please turn around. This is the story of Queen Mildred the Unmemorable, a monarch so forgettable that even her shadow occasionally wandered off in search of someone more interesting. She didn't conquer with swords or scandal. No, Mildred seduced an entire empire using nothing but tepid glances, lukewarm porridge, and the hypnotic power of bureaucratic romance. Her love letters were written in triplicate. Her courtship rituals involved synchronized sighing, and her idea of foreplay, a 47-page grain tax proposal. So grab your blanket, fluff your pillow, and prepare to be gently bored into blissful unconsciousness. This tale is so soothing, even your insomnia will file for early retirement. Like and subscribe if your eyelids are already halfway down. Let me know in the comments from where you're watching, whether it's your bed, your couch, or the floor you collapsed onto while trying to read this. Special shout out to the 3 people watching from their fridge light. You're the real MVPs. It was the social event of the season. Not because it was exciting, but because it was the only event scheduled between the Empire's annual sock inventory and the Festival of Lukewarm Soup. The Beige Ball was Queen Mildred's idea, a celebration of neutrality, modest fabrics, and the thrilling absence of color. Invitations were printed on recycled parchment and hand-delivered by royal pigeons trained to sigh on arrival. The dress code, strictly beige, taupe, or emotionally exhausted. One noble arrived in a robe made of sandpaper and was immediately declared best dressed. The ballroom was decorated with beige streamers, beige candles, and a beige fog machine that emitted a gentle puff of apathy every 15 minutes. The chandeliers were dimmed to barely trying, and the music was provided by the Royal Orchestra of Shrugging Strings, who played a 12-hour loop of ambient yawns. Queen Mildred entered fashionably horizontal, reclining on a velvet chaise lounge, pushed by 4 exhausted footmen. Her gown was made of oatmeal and regret. Her tiara was a repurposed napkin ring. She waved to the crowd with the grace of someone trying to shoo away a fly, but not really committed to it. The dancing began promptly at 7:03 p.m. and ended at 7:04 p.m., when everyone realized they preferred standing still. The official dance of the evening was the Sway of Disinterest, which involved gently rocking back and forth while maintaining eye contact with a nearby curtain. Mildred's grand entrance was followed by her grand speech, which included the line, "Let this evening be a celebration of beige, balance, and the beauty of not caring too much." The crowd erupted in polite nods. One duke attempted to flirt with Mildred by complimenting her choice of sock elasticity. She responded with a 3-minute silence that was later transcribed and archived as the mildest rejection in royal history. By midnight, most guests had fallen asleep in their chairs, and the royal snore counter had to be reset twice due to overwhelming data. The ball was declared a resounding success, mostly because no one had the energy to disagree, and thus Queen Mildred seduced the nobility, not with allure, but with ambiance. Beige became the new black, indifference became fashionable, and the empire, once again, slipped deeper into the cozy clutches of her sleepy reign. Fashion in Drausylvania had always been a tepid affair. The nobility favored garments that whispered rather than shouted, and the most daring trend of the previous decade had been slightly shinier buttons. But Queen Mildred, ever the innovator in the art of underwhelming seduction, took things to a new level. She went full monastic. One morning, she emerged from her chambers wearing a robe so plain it was legally classified as visual silence. Gone were the jewels, the silks, the embroidered declarations of wealth. In their place, burlap, humility, and a faint scent of mothballs. Her advisors gasped, not out of shock, but because they'd forgotten how to breathe during her 90-minute speech on the virtues of linen. The royal tailor wept softly into a spool of thread, whispering, "She's transcended fashion. She's become a mood." Mildred's makeover sparked a movement. Nobles began trading their velvet cloaks for potato sacks. The Duchess of Yorkshire wore a curtain to brunch. The Earl of May commissioned a tunic made entirely of recycled tax forms. It was the dawn of monastic chic, and it swept the empire like a very slow breeze. The Queen's new look came with a new philosophy. Let us dress not to impress, but to depress. Gently, she introduced the royal wardrobe of emotional neutrality, featuring the cloak of quiet regret, the tunic of mild disappointment, the slippers of existential pause. Fashion shows were replaced with garment contemplation circles, where nobles sat in silence and stared at beige swatches while sipping lukewarm broth. One count fainted from overstimulation after seeing a robe with 2 pockets. Mildred's seduction of the empire continued, not with allure, but with asceticism. Her robes whispered of restraint, her sandals squeaked of subtle rebellion, and her empire, wrapped in the warm embrace of underwhelming textiles, sighed in collective comfort. Diplomacy in Drowsylvania had always been a slow-moving affair, often conducted via carrier snail and interpreted by half-asleep scribes. But Queen Mildred, ever the mistress of monotony, elevated the art of peacekeeping to new levels of yawn-inducing brilliance. It began with a minor border dispute between Drowsylvania and the neighboring kingdom of Snorovia, a land famous for its national pastime, staring at walls. Tensions had risen over a shared patch of land known as the Field of Slight Interest, which contained 1 tree, 3 rocks, and a mysterious puddle that occasionally burped. Rather than send troops or envoys, Mildred sent a scroll. Not a dramatic scroll sealed with wax and urgency, but a 47-foot-long parchment titled Preliminary Thoughts on the Concept of Possibly Considering a Peaceful Resolution Eventually. It was delivered by a pigeon named Harold, who took frequent naps en route. The Snoravian king, his drowsiness. Reginald the Recliner responded with his own scroll, a response to the preliminary thoughts regarding the concept of possibly considering a peaceful resolution, eventually, but only if it's not too much trouble. Thus began the slowest diplomatic exchange in recorded history. Over the course of 18 months, the 2 monarchs exchanged 7 scrolls, 4 sighs, 1 fruit basket, returned due to excessive enthusiasm, a napkin with the words, "Let's not," written in crayon. Eventually, the Treaty of Tedium was signed in a ceremony so uneventful that the official witnesses forgot they were attending. The treaty included clauses such as, both parties agree to not do anything rash, or anything at all, really. The field of slight interest shall remain shared, provided no one visits it. All future disputes shall be resolved via interpretive yawning. The signing was followed by a celebration featuring tepid tea, a 3-hour silence, and a ceremonial shrug. Mildred wore her finest robe of diplomatic indifference and gave a speech that was later described as a masterclass in verbal wallpaper. And so, Queen Mildred seduced the realm of international politics, not with charisma, but with chronic fatigue. Her treaty became a model for future peace talks, inspiring generations of diplomats to embrace the power of prolonged hesitation. It began, as all great revolutions do, with a nap. Queen Mildred, ever the visionary of vertical rest, declared that all royal decrees henceforth must be delivered on embroidered pillows, not scrolls, not proclamations, pillows, preferably stuffed with goose feathers and existential dread. The reasoning was simple. If the law must be enforced, Mildred said, let it be cushioned. The Royal Seamstress Guild was immediately overwhelmed. Orders poured in for pillows bearing messages like, "Thou shalt not loiter near the royal shrubbery. Taxes are due, but only if you feel emotionally ready. Please refrain from jousting before brunch." Each pillow was hand-stitched in cursive, so sleepy it resembled the handwriting of someone halfway through a dream. The royal couriers, now dubbed the Fluff Brigade, delivered these plush mandates with great ceremony, often placing them gently on citizens' laps while humming lullabies. One particularly controversial pillow read, "War is postponed indefinitely. Please enjoy a warm beverage." The generals, confused but well rested, took up knitting. Soon, the pillow protocol expanded beyond governance. Courtroom verdicts were handed down via decorative cushions. Marriage proposals were embroidered in satin. Even breakups were softened with phrases like, "It's not you, it's the stuffing." The empire embraced the change. Citizens began communicating exclusively through pillow messages. Arguments were resolved with pillow fights, which were legally classified as emotional negotiations. One noble attempted to start a rebellion, but was thwarted when his manifesto was sewn into a throw pillow and mistaken for interior decor. Mildred's seduction of the empire deepened, not with passion, but with plush. Her rule was soft, her laws squishy, and her legacy increasingly nap-worthy. It was the quietest conflict in the history of Drowsylvania. No swords were drawn, no cannons fired, no one even raised their voice. It was, quite literally, a war of whispers. The trouble began when the Kingdom of Mermuria accused Drowsylvania of excessive sighing near their border. Mildred, ever the diplomat of drowsiness, responded with a whisper so soft it was mistaken for a breeze. Mermuria retaliated with a passive-aggressive whisper delivered via scented parchment and folded into the shape of a shrug. Thus began the Whisper War. Troops were deployed, but only those trained in stealth, yawning, and silent marching. The battlefield was a meadow known as the Field of Unspoken Tension, where soldiers tiptoed in circles and occasionally exchanged glances of mild concern. Mildred's strategy was revolutionary. Let them whisper. We shall whisper back, but slower. She formed the Royal Regiment of Hushed Responses, led by General Mumbleton, whose battle cry was, "Eh." Their weapons included feathered fans for muffling declarations, blankets for strategic napping, scrolls written in invisible ink, just in case someone got too curious. The war escalated to a dramatic moment when both sides attempted to deliver declarations of intent simultaneously. The result was a sonic void so powerful it caused 3 diplomats to forget why they were there. Eventually, peace was brokered through a joint nap summit. Both kingdoms agreed to whisper only during daylight hours, limit sighing to 3 per citizen per week, establish a neutral zone filled with beanbags and chamomile tea. The whisper war ended not with a bang, but with a collective exhale. Mildred's seduction of the empire continued, not with force, but with hush. Her reign lulled even her enemies into a state of agreeable drowsiness. As the empire drifted deeper into the cozy fog of Queen Mildred's reign, a troubling trend emerged. Widespread emotional flatness. Citizens reported feeling generally meh, mildly okay, and in one extreme case, slightly interested in something. But it passed. Mildred, ever the monarch of mellow moods, knew drastic action was needed. So, she summoned the royal animal whisperer, Lady Murmur, and declared, "Bring me a creature that embodies calm, cuddliness, and the ability to stare into your soul without judgment." 3 days later, a llama named Gerald arrived. Gerald was no ordinary llama. He had the temperament of a therapist, the posture of a philosopher, and the fur of a cloud that had just finished a meditation retreat. His eyes held the wisdom of someone who had seen too many spreadsheets and survived. Mildred appointed him Emotional Support Llama to the Empire, a title previously held by a particularly empathetic houseplant. Gerald's duties included standing silently in courtrooms to reduce tension, attending royal meetings, and chewing thoughtfully, offering nonverbal validation to nobles experiencing existential dread. Citizens flocked to Gerald for comfort. He became a national icon. His face appeared on pillows, lukewarm tea mugs, and the official, "I'm fine, I guess" commemorative blanket. One duke claimed Gerald cured his ennui simply by blinking at him. Mildred herself grew fond of Gerald, often consulting him on matters of state by asking, "Should we raise taxes?" and interpreting his ear twitches as divine guidance. Gerald never spoke, but his silence was more profound than any speech ever given in the grand hall of tepid occasions. Eventually, Gerald was granted his own chamber in the palace, complete with hay-scented incense and a mural of clouds doing yoga. His presence became so soothing that the Empire's stress levels dropped to barely detectable, and so Queen Mildred seduced the emotional core of her empire, not with passion, but with passive livestock. Gerald became the fuzzy embodiment of her reign, calm, quiet, and just weird enough to work. In the dimly lit alcove behind the royal archives, where dust motes danced like bored ballerinas and the scent of parchment lingered like a passive-aggressive perfume, love was quietly alphabetized. His name was Percival Blott, royal filing clerk, 3rd class, a man whose idea of flirting involved color-coded tabs and a well-timed sigh. He had never been kissed, but he had once received a strongly worded compliment about his penmanship. Queen Mildred first noticed Percival during a routine inspection of the Empire, set scrolls of slight importance. He was hunched over a stack of tax records, gently whispering sweet nothings to a misfiled invoice. Their eyes met across a sea of bureaucracy. She blinked. He blinked. A quill rolled off the table. It was electric. Their courtship was slow, glacial, practically geological. It began with shared glances during budget meetings and escalated to synchronized yawning during census reviews. Percival once left a sticky note on her desk that read, "Your margins are impeccable." Mildred responded with a pillow embroidered with the words, I find your filing system emotionally stabilizing. They were, in every sense, a perfect match. Two souls bound by the quiet thrill of administrative excellence. Their dates consisted of reorganizing the Royal Archive by emotional tone, reading footnotes aloud by candlelight, playing Guess the Expense Code until one of them fell asleep. One evening, Percival presented Mildred with a gift, a scroll holder carved from recycled meeting chairs. She wept softly into her robe. It was the most romantic thing she'd ever received. Rumors spread. Nobles whispered of the Queen's mysterious suitor. Some claimed he was a ghost. Others believed he was a sentient filing cabinet. But Mildred knew the truth. He was hers, and he understood the seductive power of a well-labeled drawer. Their love never made headlines. It made spreadsheets. And in the quiet corners of the palace, beneath the flickering torchlight of forgotten hallways, their romance continued, soft, slow, and deeply organized. It was the most uneventful siege in military history. Snorberg, a sleepy fortress town nestled between the River Yonne and Mount May, had long been considered strategically irrelevant. Its defenses included a moat filled with lukewarm chamomile tea and a drawbridge operated by a very tired goat named Clive. But one day, for reasons historians still debate, mostly because they keep falling asleep mid-discussion, the neighboring Duchy of Blurtsville decided to invade. Their army arrived with banners, trumpets, and a general named Sir Excitement, a man whose voice was legally classified as too loud for diplomacy. Queen Mildred, upon hearing of the siege, responded with her usual calm. Let them wait. Perhaps they'll reconsider after a nap. She dispatched no troops. Instead, she sent the Royal Bureau of Prolonged Delay, armed with bureaucratic forms in triplicate, a 400-page pamphlet titled, So You Think You Want to Invade, Gerald the Emotional Support Llama, who stared at the enemy until they began questioning their life choices. The Blurtsville army camped outside Snorberg's walls, waiting for resistance. None came. Instead, they received daily deliveries of lukewarm soup and mildly discouraging poetry. One soldier defected after reading a haiku about moss. After 3 weeks, morale plummeted. Trumpets were replaced with harmonicas. Banners drooped. Sir Excitement began hosting mandatory nap circles. Eventually, the army fell asleep en masse, some on hay bales, others in their own helmets. Mildred declared victory via pillow. It read, Thanks for stopping by. Please leave quietly. The siege was lifted. Snorberg celebrated with a parade of yawns and a ceremonial blanket folding. The goat Clive was knighted for his service and immediately retired. And so, Queen Mildred seduced the art of warfare, not with strength, but with stillness. Her empire remained untouched, not because it was impenetrable, but because it was simply too cozy to conquer. In most empires, taxes are levied on income, property, or the occasional scandal. But under Queen Mildred's reign, the most valuable commodity was rest. And so, in a moment of bureaucratic brilliance, or possibly just post-lunch drowsiness, she introduced the nap tax. The concept was simple. The more naps you took, the more you owed, but only if you remembered to report them, which, of course, no one did. The official decree was delivered, naturally, on a pillow embroidered with the words, Sleep is wealth. Pay accordingly. The Royal Bureau of Slumber Assessment was formed, staffed by yawning clerks and one very confused rooster. Citizens were required to log their naps in the National Snooze Ledger, a book so soft it doubled as a pillow. Entries included nap duration, rounded to the nearest sigh, nap location, bed, hammock, under a desk, etc. Nap mood, content, existential, or accidental while reading grain tariffs. Queen Mildred herself was the top napper in the empire, clocking in an average of 6 royal snoozes per day. Her tax bill was ceremonially burned each month in a ritual called the Great Forgetting. The nap tax had unexpected consequences. Productivity plummeted, but morale soared. Pillow sales skyrocketed. One village declared itself a sovereign nap zone and promptly fell asleep for 3 weeks. To encourage compliance, Mildred introduced nap credits, rewards for creative napping. Citizens earned credits for napping during meetings, napping while standing, napping while pretending to be awake. The empire became a haven of horizontal ambition. Hammocks replaced office chairs. Meetings were held in blanket forts. The phrase, "I'll sleep on it," became legally binding. And so, Queen Mildred seduced the economy, not with growth, but with grogginess. Her nap tax turned rest into revenue, and her empire into a kingdom of cozy capitalism. The Drowsylvanian Senate was a place of great importance and even greater naps, composed of 47 noble persons, 12 honorary yawners, and one ceremonial houseplant named Fernando. It was responsible for passing laws, debating policies, and occasionally remembering what they were doing. Queen Mildred, having already seduced the census, the fashion world, and the military via nap, turned her gaze toward the Senate, not with fiery speeches or dramatic gestures, but with the slow, hypnotic rhythm of legislative lullabies. Her strategy was simple: bore them into submission. She began by proposing a bill titled The Mild Adjustment of Grain Tariffs in Regions of Moderate Moisture. It was 312 pages long, featured 87 footnotes, and included a pie chart that was just a picture of an actual pie. She read it aloud, slowly, over the course of 3 days. By hour 6, half the Senate was asleep. By hour 12, the other half had begun knitting. By hour 24, Fernando the houseplant had been elected Speaker of the Senate. In a unanimous vote no one remembered casting, Mildred continued her campaign of gentle persuasion with the Bill of Slight Improvements to Fence Regulations, the Act of Occasional Pigeon Management, the royal suggestion of maybe doing something about that one, Smell in the West Wing. Each proposal was delivered on a pillow, read in a tone best described as verbal chamomile, and accompanied by Gerald the emotional support llama, who stood in the corner and blinked meaningfully. Eventually, the Senate stopped resisting. They passed every bill she proposed, mostly because they couldn't remember what they were voting on. One senator attempted to object, but accidentally complimented her robe instead. Mildred's seduction of the Senate was complete, not with power, but with patience, not with persuasion, but with prolonged exposure to procedural monotony. Her laws were passed, her empire yawned, and democracy, wrapped in a blanket of bureaucracy, drifted gently into legislative slumber. Love letters in Drowsylvania were typically grand affairs, sealed with wax, perfumed with ambition, and delivered by doves trained in dramatic timing. But Queen Mildred, ever the minimalist of emotion, chose a different path. One morning, she penned a scroll, not a declaration of passion, but a gentle murmur of maybe feelings. It was titled, A Modest Consideration of Your Continued Presence in My General Vicinity, written in ink made from steeped chamomile and melancholy. The scroll contained phrases such as, "I find your company tolerable in most lighting. Your sighs harmonize well with mine. If I were to choose someone to sit silently beside during a grain tariff review, it might be you." She rolled the scroll, tied it with a ribbon that had previously been used to bundle census forms, and handed it to Gerald, the emotional support llama, who blinked twice and trotted off toward the royal filing clerk, Percival Blott. Percival received the scroll while alphabetizing the Empire's nap reports. He read it slowly, then reread it upside down, just in case it was a metaphor. He wept softly into a folder labeled Feelings Miscellaneous. His reply came 3 days later, in the form of a sticky note tucked inside a pillow. It read, "I too find your presence moderately reassuring." Thus began the most tepid romance in royal history. They exchanged scrolls weekly, each one slightly more affectionate than the last. "Your robe rustles in a way I find emotionally stabilizing. I dreamed of you last night. You were alphabetizing clouds. I would consider holding your hand, provided gloves are involved." The empire swooned. Nobles began writing their own scrolls of slight affection. One baron proposed marriage via a footnote. Another duchess confessed her love using a pie chart labeled, "My feelings, mostly confused." Mildred's seduction of the empire deepened, not with fireworks, but with footnotes. Her scrolls became legendary, archived in the Royal Library of Lukewarm Romance, and studied by scholars who specialized in emotional ambiguity. In most kingdoms, tournaments involved jousting, swordplay, or at least a mildly aggressive game of croquet. But in Drowsylvania, under the reign of Queen Mildred the Unmemorable, the most anticipated event of the year was the Royal Yawn Off, held annually in the Grand Hall of Tepid Occasions. The Yawn Off was a test of stamina, subtlety, and sheer disinterest. Nobles, peasants, and one emotionally complex llama gathered to compete in the ancient art of yawning, not for speed, but for style. Queen Mildred presided over the event from her velvet chaise lounge, wearing a robe made of recycled bedtime stories and a crown that doubled as a sleep mask. Her opening speech was a single sentence: "Let the yawns commence." The rules were simple. Yawns must be genuine or convincingly fake. No added sound effects. Snoring disqualified. Bonus points for contagiousness. If your yawn caused 3 others, you earned the coveted Ripple of Ennui Award. Contestants included Sir Dullard of Blinksford, who yawned so slowly it was mistaken for a weather pattern. Lady Snoozette, whose yawn was accompanied by a dramatic eye roll and a fainting gesture. Gerald, the emotional support llama, who didn't yawn, but stared so deeply into the crowd that 5 people fell asleep. Percival Blott, the royal filing clerk, and Mildred's maybe romantic interest, entered the competition with a yawn so understated it was later described as a whisper from the soul. Mildred awarded him a pillow embroidered with the words, "You moved me, barely." The final round was a yawn duel between Mildred herself and the reigning champion, Baron Yonicus. They sat across from each other, robes billowing gently, eyes half-lidded. The silence was so profound that a pigeon fell asleep mid-flight. Mildred's winning yawn was a masterpiece, beginning with a sigh, peaking with a subtle jaw stretch, and ending in a contemplative blink. The crowd erupted in gentle nods. Baron Yonicus conceded by curling into a blanket and whispering, "Respect." The royal yawn-off concluded with a ceremonial nap and a buffet of sleep-themed snacks, dream-shaped cookies, lukewarm milk, and a pudding called ambivalence. And so, Queen Mildred seduced the spirit of competition, not with glory, but with grogginess. Her empire yawned in unity, and the realm drifted deeper into its golden age of gentle apathy. In the quiet corridors of Castle Yon Minster, where echoes politely declined to echo and tapestries depicted scenes of mild interest, there lived a bard named Thistlewump. He was known across the empire, not for his talent, but for his ability to turn any tale into a lullaby of pure indifference. Thistlewump's lute was tuned to the key of meh. His voice hovered somewhere between a sigh and a distant hum. His most famous song, Ode to a Slightly Damp Tuesday, was banned in 3 provinces for causing spontaneous napping. Queen Mildred, naturally, adored him. She summoned him to court with a pillogram that read, "Sing me something that makes me feel almost nothing." Thistlewump arrived wearing a cloak made of recycled curtain tassels and a hat that looked like it had given up halfway through being a hat. He bowed with the enthusiasm of a man who had once tried caffeine and found it too spicy. His first performance was a ballad titled The Legend of the Forgotten Spoon, a 47-verse epic about a utensil misplaced during a mildly important brunch. Nobles wept, not from emotion, just from sheer exhaustion. Other hits included The Chronicles of the Slightly Misaligned, Bookshelf, Ballad of the Blinking Scribe, My Love for You is Like a Filing Cabinet, sturdy, unlabeled, and full of paper. I'll Never Read. Mildred commissioned a full album, recorded on scrolls, and distributed via carrier llama. It was played in waiting rooms, tax offices, and one particularly rebellious bakery that specialized in existential croissants. Thistlewump's music became the soundtrack of the empire. Couples danced to his dirges. Babies fell asleep to his verses. One duke claimed his insomnia was cured after hearing Sonnet to a Slightly Uneven Cobblestone. And so, Queen Mildred seduced the arts, not with passion, but with poetic apathy. Her bard sang the empire into a gentle stupor, and his ballads became lullabies for a realm that preferred its drama horizontal. Every empire eventually faces rebellion. Some are loud, some are bloody. Drowsylvania's, however, was politely inconvenient. It began when a group of mildly disgruntled peasants from the village of Yonford decided they totally had enough. Enough of the beige. Enough of the lullabies. Enough of the mandatory nap. Breaks interrupting their regularly scheduled loafing. They called themselves the League of Slight Discontent, and their manifesto was printed on recycled parchment with the bold declaration, "We would prefer things be marginally different." Their demands included replacing chamomile tea with something a bit zesty, introducing colors beyond taupe and oatmeal, reducing the number of pillow-based laws to a manageable fluff. Queen Mildred, upon receiving the manifesto, delivered via a pigeon wearing a tiny protest sash, responded with a yawn so profound it was later classified as a seismic event. She then issued a royal decree. Let them rebel, quietly, and only on weekends. The League organized a march. It was scheduled for 2 p.m., but most participants arrived at 2:17, having stopped for a group nap. Their chants included, "We're here, we're awake-ish," "Down with decorative neutrality," "What do we want?" "Something else." "When do we want it?" Eventually, the rebellion reached its peak when the League refused to attend the royal brunch of blandness. Instead, they hosted a rival brunch featuring mildly spicy potatoes and a playlist of songs with actual tempo. It was described by one noble as alarmingly flavorful. Mildred, ever the seductress of subtlety, responded by sending each rebel a pillow embroidered with the phrase, "I acknowledge your enthusiasm. Please rest." The rebellion fizzled out within a week. Most members returned to their previous lives, citing exhaustion and a newfound appreciation for lukewarm tea. The League was officially rebranded as the Society of Occasional Suggestions, and now meets monthly to discuss things they might someday consider doing. And so, Queen Mildred seduced dissent, not with suppression, but with softness. Her empire remained intact, gently padded by the quiet power of passive resistance. The royal treasury of Drowsylvania was a place of numbers, ledgers, and the occasional existential crisis over coin placement. It was guarded not by soldiers, but by accountants wielding quills and a deep fear of decimal errors. The walls were lined with scrolls so dry they were used to dehydrate fruit. Queen Mildred, having already seduced the census, the Senate, and even the concept of rebellion, turned her attention to the empire's finances, not with audits or austerity, but with ambient sighs and a budget so soothing it was printed on velvet. Her first act as fiscal flirt, she replaced the Treasury's motto, "Accuracy above all," with, "Let's just see how it feels." She introduced the Emotional Budgeting Initiative, which allocated funds based on vibes. Departments submitted requests not in numbers, but in feelings. The Ministry of Slightly Urgent Affairs requested a comforting amount of gold. The Bureau of Blanket Distribution asked for enough to feel hugged. Gerald, the emotional support llama, received a grant labeled Hay and Hay Adjacent Luxuries. Mildred's budget meetings became legendary. Instead of spreadsheets, she used mood boards. Instead of pie charts, she served actual pie. One treasurer fainted after she suggested balancing the books using interpretive dance. Her seduction of the treasury deepened with the introduction of the Pillow Fund, a reserve of soft currency stored in embroidered sacks. The Nap Bond, citizens could invest in national naps and receive interest in the form of extra sleep time. The Yawn Index, a new economic indicator based on how many nobles fell asleep during fiscal briefings. The empire's economy didn't boom, it gently exhaled. Inflation was replaced with relaxation. Trade agreements were signed in cursive, so sleepy they resembled lullabies. One merchant claimed he made more profit by simply offering customers a place to sit and sigh. And so, Queen Mildred seduced the treasury, not with greed, but with gentleness. Her financial policies were soft, her currency cozy, and her empire richer in rest than any realm before it. The Royal Council of Drowsylvania was once a place of sharp minds and sharper debates. But under Queen Mildred's reign, it had evolved into something far more tranquil and far more baffled. The council met weekly in the Chamber of Ambiguous Intentions, a room decorated with motivational tapestries that read things like "Maybe tomorrow" and "Let us not rush." The chairs were beanbags. The minutes were recorded in watercolor. The agenda was usually misplaced. Queen Mildred presided from her chaise lounge, sipping lukewarm tea and occasionally blinking in a way that might have been a signal or a nap. No one was ever sure. Her courtiers included Lord Muddlethorpe, who once tried to pass a law banning enthusiasm, Lady Vexley, who spoke only in rhetorical questions, Sir Blorp, whose job title was Minister of Miscellaneous, and whose main contribution was interpretive sighing. Each meeting began with a moment of contemplative silence, followed by a group yawn and the ceremonial reading of last week's minutes, which were usually just doodles of llamas and half-finished haikus. Mildred's leadership style was famously cryptic. She would say things like, "Let the winds of maybe guide our policy," or "I feel strongly about something, but I'm not sure what." Her courtiers, desperate to interpret her wisdom, developed entire schools of thought: Mildredian ambiguism, the belief that clarity is overrated, royal vagastry, a philosophy centered around doing things eventually, the pillow doctrine. All decisions must be soft, reversible, and embroidered. One meeting lasted 6 hours and resulted in a decree that simply read, "Let's just see how it goes." Another ended when Gerald, the emotional support llama, sneezed, which was interpreted as a veto. Despite the confusion, the empire thrived. Or at least, it didn't collapse. Policies were passed, naps were taken, and the citizens remained blissfully unaware of what was happening, because, frankly, no one knew. And so, Queen Mildred seduced governance, not with clarity, but with cozy confusion. Her council became a sanctuary of soft uncertainty, and her empire floated gently on the cloud of close enough. It didn't happen all at once. It was gradual, like a yawn passed from one noble to another, like a lullaby hummed by a llama in the moonlight. But one day, without fanfare or fireworks, the empire of Drowsylvania simply went to sleep. It began with the National Siesta Initiative, a policy Mildred introduced via pillow decree that encouraged citizens to take at least one nap per mood swing. Productivity dipped, happiness rose. The Ministry of Slightly Urgent Affairs changed its name to the Ministry of Occasional Consideration and promptly took a sabbatical. Schools replaced tests with nap evaluations. The highest grade was REM. The lowest was still blinking. Children were taught the history of yawns, the geometry of blanket folds, and the ethics of sharing pillows. The economy adjusted. The new currency was snorebucks, redeemable for warm milk and compliments. The stock market was replaced with a mood board. Investors tracked the yawn index, which peaked every Tuesday afternoon. Even the weather got in on it. Forecasts were delivered in whispers. Tomorrow, cloudy with a chance of introspection. Wednesday, light drizzle and emotional neutrality. Weekend, perfect for blanket-based diplomacy. Queen Mildred, now revered as the matron of melatonin, ruled from a throne made of memory foam. Her crown was a sleep mask. Her scepter was a rolled-up scroll of bedtime stories. She spoke rarely, and when she did, it was usually to say, "Let us rest. We've earned it." Probably, Gerald, the emotional support llama, was knighted again, just for being fuzzy. His official title became Sir Gerald of the Gentle Blink, and his portrait was hung in every bedroom across the realm. Eventually, the empire entered what scholars would later call the golden age of napping. Borders faded. Time slowed. The national anthem was replaced with a soft hum, and the people, wrapped in quilts of quiet contentment, dreamed together. And so, Queen Mildred seduced the very rhythm of life, not with urgency, but with ease. Her empire didn't fall, it reclined. And in that great, collective exhale, Drowsylvania became the first nation to achieve full, uninterrupted rest. Centuries passed. The empire of Drowsylvania once a bastion of beige brilliance and bureaucratic bliss, faded quietly into the folds of history. Maps no longer marked its borders. Textbooks skipped its chapters. Even pigeons forgot the flight paths. But deep in the royal archives of somewhere, beneath a stack of scrolls labeled miscellaneous yawns, a dusty drawer was opened by a curious historian named Dr. Snibble. Inside, nestled between a pillow and a half-eaten biscuit, lay the legacy of Queen Mildred the Unmemorable. It wasn't a crown. It wasn't a sword. It was a scroll. A single, sleepy scroll, titled, "A Modest Account of My Reign, if anyone's interested." Dr. Snibble read it, then reread it, then fell asleep halfway through the third paragraph. When he awoke, he felt calm, centered, slightly more okay than usual. Word spread. Mildred's story was retold. Not with fanfare, but with fondness. Her reign became a bedtime legend. Children whispered her name before naps. Adults quoted her pillow decrees during moments of stress. Gerald, the emotional support llama, was canonized in the Church of Cozy. And so, Queen Mildred was remembered, not for battles won or monuments built, but for the empire she lulled into peace. Her seduction of the world was slow, soft, and strangely effective. She ruled with sighs, with scrolls, with silence, and in doing so, she gave her people the greatest gift of all, rest. And now, dear dreamer, the tale is told. The scroll is sealed. The llama has blinked his final blink for the evening. You've journeyed through beige balls, whisper wars, nap taxes, and the softest rebellion history never noticed. You've met a queen who ruled not with fire, but with fog, not with fury, but with fleece. So fluff your pillow, dim the lights, let the gentle hum of Drowsylvania drift through your thoughts like a lullaby sung by a filing clerk. Like and subscribe if your eyelids are now heavier than royal velvet. Let me know in the comments from where you're watching. Your bed, your blanket cocoon, or the quiet corner of your imagination where llamas wear crowns. Special shout out to those watching from London, wrapped in a shawl, sipping sleepy tea, and wondering if they too could rule an empire with a sigh. Good night, noble napper. May your dreams be mildly interesting and your blankets forever tucked.